You are at war with yourself and likely don't realize it. Your thoughts, beliefs, habits, and actions often sabotage you. Are they helping you overcome adversity or setting you up for failure? To win this battle, you must connect with your inner warrior. We all have a warrior within us, one that strengthens our resolve and helps us to rise to meet life's challenges. If you're just surviving rather than thriving, then it's time to embrace the warrior archetype, live the warrior ethos, and ascend. If you are a veteran, first responder, or someone looking to take charge of your life, find your tribe, and then be the hero of your own story, this podcast is for you. Join Mike Kinney and Matt Hastings, two retired U.S. Army officers who served in U.S. Army Special Operations and Army Aviation units, as they share with you optimal performance practices they learned in their time with the military and Warriors Ascent, a 501c3 nonprofit that helps veterans and warriors with PTS.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Warriors Ascent podcast. I'm Mike Kenny. This is Matt Hastings. We are your hosts, and it's great to be here.
It's good to be here, Mike. I can't believe we're on episode 2 of the Warriors Ascent. Excited to do it. What are we going to talk about today?
All right, so today we are going to expound on the concepts of the warrior archetype and warrior ethos. We teed that up in the pilot last time, but we'll go into a little bit more detail this time. So we'll start, with the concept of the warrior archetype. So bottom line, the warrior archetype is a psychological construct. I've heard it first from, Carl Jung. He, from my understanding, broke out, I'll say, a series of 12 archetypes. We'll speak to a few, but the predominant focus is going to be on the warrior archetype, as one would expect. But bottom line, these are, psychological concepts, constructs, call them personas, that reside within everyone. And for our purposes, we're going to talk about the warrior archetype as a means of overcoming obstacles, seeking strength, overcoming adversity, and tapping into that warrior archetype. We'll speak later about warrior ethos, which are really the embodiment, the virtues, the values that are associated with that archetype. So call it the manifestation of the warrior archetype. But for now, let's talk about the warrior archetype and what that means and how it's used. So I'll set the stage a little bit, and then I'll defer to Matt shortly thereafter. But bottom line, the warrior archetype resides in everybody. And what we want, the audience to know is that in our time in the military and also with our nonprofit Warriors Ascent, where we see a lot of our warriors, our veterans, first responders, get themselves into trouble, is that warrior archetype is absolutely integral and necessary for them to do their jobs. More often than not, facing adversity and doing very tough and dangerous things. And they really need to lean on that warrior archetype and engage with it. The downside is when they bring that home with them, or they bring it to certain situations where that archetype, let's be honest, quite frankly, isn't required, or isn't needed. So as I've joked with a lot of our participants at Warriors Ascent, particularly our veterans, what I'll say to them, if you're going home to your wife and kids, or your family members, and you're bringing the knife hand like this, all right, you need to do this, and you move out, and don't bring the word to every situation. That's the cause of friction, and things of that nature. Now, the flip side of that, and this is, I'll say, commentary on society, is I think we've lost touch with the warrior archetype. I think for some, they feel it's a vestige of a bygone era, a quaint anachronism that no longer has relevance today. And I would submit to everyone that that is not the case, and that's a very dangerous mindset, because as we've pointed out, it's the warrior archetype that allows us to persevere in the face of adversity, to not shy away from obstacles, or conflicts where needed, but to actually overcome them. And if we're not prepared to do that, we're not living full and fulfilling lives.
That's right.
So with all of that said, Matt, please, you've had a long and storied career. Tell us, how the warrior archetype has helped you in your very illustrious military career.
Well, yeah, obviously I was in the military for 20 years and I had to engage the warrior, did combat and stuff like that. And that's what I think most people think of when they say the warrior. I know that when I came to Warriors Ascent, I wasn't super familiar with these archetypes, and I kind of brought it back. I have a psychology degree, but it was from like 92. Sorry about that. Long time ago. But I think I used to see people when I came back going, some people either are the service oriented people or they're not. And what I came out of an understanding and looking at these archetypes, and I truly understand and believe that that's the way it is. It's not that there aren't or aren't. Some people are displaying these different archetypes all the time. But my warrior, and what I had to do, and again, we talked about my position being a helicopter pilot and having, a crew of 4 and 11 humans on board there. And in a snap of a second, it could all be gone. Recently, we just had a crash in 6 of the 101st. And it was 2 Blackhawks, and they were flying night vision goggles at night formation, and they touched, and 9 people are dead in an instant. So it's not a mess. It's not a joke. It's gravitas we talk about.
Yeah, no, same thing happened when I was a lieutenant there at the 101st. We lost dudes all the time, during fast roping incidents and all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
And so, and the culture there is very good to try to not, repeat problems. But what it does is that warrior, for me, I brought that warrior in times when I wasn't sure what to do. I sometimes just puff up the chest, get a stern face, and use kind of a, and all of a sudden people just follow me, because all of a sudden they looked at me and said, that guy knows what he's doing. He looks confident. He looks, it's like, sometimes I was, just kidding. I was just faking it to make it. But a lot of the times that warrior attitude, and the way we trained it in the Army, which is really smart. We always did things in repetition, over and over and over and over again, until these things were ingrained in you. And it's the same kind of thing. Your attitude became ingrained in you in such a way that we were kind of like rewiring our brains to be in a certain way, and we were being told what kind of value systems and things. And we had to embrace these things in order to get through our daily grind, and it didn't matter who was around us. Best diversity organization I've ever been into, because we had a common goal, a common mission, and we were all in it together, and we all were going to hold each other's backs. And that warrior, Ken, was a role I played. I look at it, and I always talk about, I wore a suit of armor and I turned into a guy that I truly wasn't, to go do the things that we had to do, but we did them for long times. A deployment of 15 months, playing that role, is hard to take off, right? When we come home, at least it was for me.
Well, you're in that role, that persona for a long time. I mean, you've got to, I'll say play that role, for a variety of reasons. No, but I mean, I know you probably, I'm not saying don't want to talk about it, but you're a humble guy. I mean, you were flying an op and actually got shot in the leg, right? And then still was able to handle the aircraft, took some shrapnel. I mean, that's some, that's some stuff, man. So I'm sure in that case, you had some choices. You could either go, oh my God, or you can tap into that inner warrior and say, hey, I got to do what I was trained to do. So tell us about that.
Yeah, and I think that you do that. I think that any person may do that. You're driving along and suddenly a dog rushes out, or a wheel falls off a car in front of you. And it's like, you either are going to just do nothing and give up, or you're going to give it a shot and, make a move and go, holy heck, I didn't know that I was even going to do that. It's like, yeah, that's because this inner thing came up and protected you. It's like, because you have this capability inside you may not even know about it. But if you can harness it, which is what we're talking about, and live in an ethos, as we're going to talk down the road. But when you have this repetition, and I am the warrior, I become that. It's not just anymore a role I'm playing. It's I now am that, and I've struggled to come out of the role. So, how it helped me in that time was I could see everything's slow motion, and I was able to keep cool, and I was able to make the right moves and put the aircraft where it needed to go. And even though things were, I don't know if anybody's ever been shot at, but it's something you won't forget, And in this case, I could see the bullets because they were tracer rounds on. I'm wearing night vision goggles, but that's a kind of a, and then the smoke's in the air and it stings your eyes, and you can smell that very acrid smell of the, I think it's just the tracer round, but with a zing in my leg, and thinking, I'd like to say it was my butt, a little bit Forrest Gump on that, but got me right where my Kevlar seat stopped protecting my leg. And, you know, the seat did well because it took a bunch of more shot out my radios, so I didn't have
you would have
comms.
been a lot worse hurt.
Yeah, I would have. And so that was good. Again, the round was actually, we found a round located in the seat rail that makes the seat go forward and back. And it was stuck in it, poking out, you know, and it was headed right for my thigh.
Yeah, your femoral artery.
Yeah, so I'm like, wow, because the only place the helicopter didn't have armor was right exactly under my seat. So it hit just right, and just right because here I am talking about it. But that kind of a thing, you know, you talked about when do you bring it home, and you know, a lot of people have experiences with this. One of mine in particular was coming out of a 15-month deployment, you know, and they kind of let you go about a week after you get home. And this was my first tour. And so I'm on a European vacation because I was out of Germany. And, you know, we're at Disneyland Paris. And this should be, you know, vacation of a lifetime. I got a 4-year-old and my wife, and we're, you know, reunited on this family vacation. What a wonderful thing. And I'm in pure hell because all of Europe is there too on vacation, holiday. And man, it's just too many people for me. It was too many, like everybody was suspect. Everybody was after us, you know? And I knew it wasn't true, but I just couldn't take it off. And I was trying really hard just to be dad, you know? Yeah. And I kept getting this, just quit being CW3 Hastings and be Matt. And it's like, right. I got this. But I didn't have it. One in particular time, you know, getting out of this park, and I did what I called neck steering. I would have a family member and just, and I could move them around. And I'd have my kid up on my shoulders, and I'm in command of the entire scenario. Because these poor civilians that I love dearly have zero idea how dumb they are right now. They don't know all these people that want to kill them like I do. They haven't seen.
You're being facetious.
They haven't seen the evil men do. This is in my mind, you know, and this was true for me at the time because the warrior's sitting there, and I look over and I see the Disney security guards. I call them Disney cops, which is not very nice, but they were coming off of dragging a man along that was wearing the traditional garb of a Muslim person, and he was screaming very loud while carrying 2 heavy bags. And he was screaming Allah Akbar as loud as he could. Yeah. 2 weeks before, when somebody screamed Allah Akbar where I was, a resounding explosion came. So the animal instincts I had, the warrior jumped up and it screamed as loud as it could in a big, robust CW4 type voice, run. And that's when everybody looked at me like, well, who is this freak? But I didn't care because they don't know, but those things are about to blow and everybody's going to die. But me and my family are getting away. But I had to drag, and it wasn't good. And it looked like I was some kind of violent, weird guy, you know, that was doing something weird to 2 girls. And it was actually me. You know, I felt like a horrible person after the end of it because nobody exploded. Thankfully. But in my mind, that scenario played out way differently, you know, and that was hard to live down for a while, you know, and just within myself saying, geez, okay, I didn't know about the archetypes. I didn't know, but I did know I could come in and out of this warrant officer dude that would go fly and be tough, be crude, and be this whole other guy, right? And yeah, so that I think is an example where it gets us in trouble. But another example of getting like out of the uniform. I mean, you know it. I've been out of uniform for about 7 years now, and you know, I think about the same. Like we have very similar career, same age. You know, that's where it's hard to look around you to determine that, like, it feels very lonely that other people don't have these values you have, or don't look at the world in a similar way, and so that maybe the way I'm doing things is the abnormal. So I don't know. That's kind of drove me into staying away from people. And I don't know. I know you didn't have that similar thing because you jumped into this organization right away and started helping people. But, and I think what I learned here, and I appreciate it being put in a categorized format like these archetypes, and it really helps my kind of analytical brain say, yeah, man. And sometimes I jump into what's called the lover, or sometimes in, other types. And I even think that it changes with my experience and changes with my age.
So you bring up some great points. That's exactly it. So, one of the rubrics we use, I think, is from a book, King, Warrior, Lover, Magician, by Gillette and Moore, and those are 4 archetypes that they'll use. And as I mentioned before, I think Carl Jung, he's got 12, which we're not going to go all into. Suffice it to say, hey, the king is very, very dominant, take charge, very extroverted. Warrior, same thing, right? Lover, more of an empath, so there are people that have certain propensities. The bottom line, what they're getting at, and then magician is your analytic, somebody who thinks things through and is very, data driven. Bottom line is, their contention there is that people have propensities. Certainly, there's some people that are more empathic. There's some people that are more, I'll say, decisive, extroverted, more take charge. Others, ponder things endlessly. I tend to be more analytic, et cetera, et cetera. Now, where that's useful is, yeah, sure. You can understand where your propensities lie, your personality per se. But also know that those types of I'll say paradigms, they reside in everybody. And as you were beginning to point out, they're actuated at certain, junctures of your life. Now, granted, you can tap in the warrior where needed, but bottom line is there's certain, I'll say, seasons or chapters of your life where that propensity or that attraction or that manifestation of that particular archetype is more evident. So when you're in your 20s and 30s and testosterone is high and you're, CW 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm an SF captain, ODA commander. Yeah, the warrior is preeminent. That's just the role that you're playing. That is the point in your life. You're 30 years old, in your prime, your physiology, all of it. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Now, as a father in my 50s, my testosterone's less, even though I'm trying my level best to hang with the big dogs. It's hard, but no, now it's more with 2 kids, 2 boys, more nurturing, the warrior's still there. It always will be, but really, the more important aspect or the archetype that I really have to nurture more that, dare I say is more useful, is that of, the empath, the lover, the nurturer, whatever it might be, to make sure that I'm
another one you talk about, Mike, and I'd like you to expound on, if you would, is that it's a Jungian thing in that it's the warrior in his fullness, or the enlightened warrior. That's the one I think, at least in terminology, in the title at all, I just want to be that. I want to be the guy that's the enlightened warrior that knows when to bring it. And when I do bring it, I bring just the right sauce. And it's not a little too spicy, not too, underdone, but the right one. And that takes some time. And I don't know that I'm there yet. And I think it's, I talk about in some other stuff I've been writing is how a warrior just needs to keep grinding. And I think this is it, like what we talked about. And we grind through, mindfulness, and we're grinding through like yoga and meditation, whatever it takes for you. But these are elements of stuff we discovered, or I discovered through your programs. And I've been very thankful for them to help me along the path of what I consider the full warrior, the warrior in his fullness. What do you see it as?
So, and I want to say I will attribute it to either Gillette and Moore in that book, King, Warrior, Lover, Magician, or Carl Jung. But yeah, the warrior in his fullness, call it the enlightened warrior. But bottom line, the warrior that is centered, that, is strong, but balanced, so not somebody that's over aggressive, domineering, violent, to the point, beyond what is required.
Right.
The warrior in his fullness. I would say what we often see sometimes is the perversion of the warrior, and that is, somebody that is hyper aggressive, way too assertive, violent, resorts to violence for conflict resolution when there are other modalities like maybe conversation or debate, would be a better solution, so I'll call that, the perversion of the warrior. And absolutely, I think what we're striving for, quite frankly, is the warrior in his fullness, the enlightened warrior, where we're not trying to put the warrior away and say, hey, there's no place for the warrior in modern society. That is not the case. There most definitely is a place for the warrior in modern society. And let's be honest, our veterans and our first responders are at the forefront of that. So people may like to pretend that, well, now we don't need that anymore. We're in such an enlightened world. But the fact of the matter is, there are many a person, man and woman, that need to tap into that.
I was going to say that, and I know you mean that. The unique thing about a first responder, police officer in our current society is that they go home at night, every night. And then they go out and they see, it might be a terrible normal day, but it might be a car wreck day. It might be, fire or just some kind of horrible crimes and just, maybe some domestics they saw. And then they have to go home. And I just think about how I struggled to take the warrior off after 15 months. And I understand that was such a condensed time. But I wonder what it's like for them to do the daily grind, come home, the daily grind, come home. I don't know if they're better set to take that suit and change into, more of an empath at home or whatever it needs to be.
No, and that's a great point. One of the things we'll talk about are masks and personas. Again, I'll say loosely, affiliated with the archetypes, but you put on that mask or persona of the warrior in order to do your job. And it's necessary. Because again, that's where you derive strength and decisiveness and overcoming obstacles. But when you bring that home, when you can't take that mask off, and that becomes your steady state or your default position for all facets of your life, and that's some of the issues that you ran into and so many of our participants, I mean, myself included. There are times when, I'm like, well, that wasn't an optimal solution or that wasn't called for. That I think is where our warriors get into trouble. And so there's two sides to this coin, with this archetype. On one hand, when you bring the warrior to every situation, even those wherein it's not warranted, people get into trouble. There's that friction. The flip side is when, and people don't embrace the warrior when it's needed. They dismiss it as, like I said, it's an anachronism. Well, hey, this isn't the feudal times. We're not dueling. It's not knights and chivalry and all that stuff. So, hey, that's dead. No, it's not. And it's not just, and it's not just, it's not just a CW4, helicopter pilot in a combat theater that needs that. And we've mentioned this before. It's the policeman, firefighter. It's the mother who advocates for her child and has to have those uncomfortable conversations. Whether it may be a coach, an administrator, whomever, and advocates for her child. I mean, that takes some gumption. You're tapping in your warrior there. And if you don't, guess what? You're not having those conversations. You're not taking decisive action where it's warranted or it's needed. And, quite frankly, that's a problem.
Yeah. Well, I can see where, the negative side of the warrior gets a lot of press. And I think we know that. And I think there's a stigma associated with going to seek help because you're worried about that very thing. Or that, I'm going to speak for myself. I was worried that it would change or I wasn't going to have the opportunities I needed. And then I realized my mental wellness was more important. And I probably wasn't good at my job if I didn't get some help with figuring out how to incorporate back into regular life. And I thought that was anger management. I thought it was all these issues that were wrong with me.
Right.
In reality, it was just, it's a personality shift. It's like rewriting your script in your head, malleable synapses in there. Turns out that we can, through sure will, meditation, mindfulness, and wanting something so much, we can achieve good things. I know that because you and I have both been in combat. You and I have you've done way more crazy things to be a ranger and be in special forces, and just to even try out is unbelievable. So, those are the kinds of things that if you know that about you, that I have that, I don't have it today. I don't think I could go run a ranger competition, although it was fun to watch. But, I know I could do other things, and you have the same thing. So again, it transitions in our life, the vehicle in which the warrior comes out, I think too.
Yeah. So we'll say in closing, and there's, so much to talk to, just, to speak to. I'd say, in closing, at least for this aspect, so the warrior archetype, right, which is that, I'll call it that mental framework, that psychological construct. Warrior ethos are really, I'll say, the manifestation behavioral of that archetype, and we'll speak to that later. So in other words, if there's this archetype that really embodies that, right, call it almost like a mental map, what does that look like? Well, hey, living the warrior ethos is the other thing we advocate. We can speak to that in a subsequent, episode. But just to recap, really, I'd say the big takeaway, the message, warrior archetype, very much needed in society. I mean, it's just part of the human experience, no doubt. I mean, back, way back when, and is, I'll say, encapsulated in our, mythology and stories and all of it. But I think where people go awry is either A, they feel, hey, it's no longer needed, or it doesn't apply to them, because that's not the role they play. And certainly not always, but I would submit to you that everyone needs to tap into that here or there. Because it transcends just the warrior role. It's facing adversity. But number two is the perversion of it, right? Or bringing it where it's not welcome or required. And to our warriors, our veterans, and our first responders, knowing when to turn it on and off. And when you've spent a career, a life, in a profession that really values that, it's hard to know sometimes when to turn that off, or when it is, I'll say, a suboptimal, pattern of behavior or mindset. Yeah, and we've seen guys and gals run into some real problems with that. So, our advice in closing would be, it's powerful. It helps you overcome adversity. Know when and where to tap into it. And, again, I'll say it again. It's a part of the human experience, and you'd be well served to use it when warranted and tap into it. But to the converse, know when to apply it, because that perversion of that archetype, we see that resident in the news all the time. People resorting to violence, to resolve conflicts. People that can't debate and argue, they're shouting over one another.
Right.
It's just like, no, there are better ways of resolving conflict. And that really is, to me, when the warrior's getting out of control. So
that's great.
All right.
That's a good one, man. That's a good wrap for, got to talk about the warrior ethos. That's just,
we will.
It's cliffhanger.
All right. We'll see everyone next time. And
next episode.
We'll explicate that.
Good job, Mike.
Bam.
Hi. Matt Hastings here, sending a thank you for watching this episode of the Warriors Ascent podcast. We strive to build a community of warriors made up of our nation's veterans and first responders. And to reach as many of those in need as possible, we need your help. Please just smash that like button and comment or share our content. Warriors Ascent is a Kansas City-based nonprofit that aids veterans and first responders with PTS. I went through this effective program and want those that are struggling to find what I found. Check us out on our website at warriorsascent.org.